Welcome to yet another episode of Policy Beyond Politics. In this show, we are discussing some unprecedented challenges that we see in our polity due to novel coronavirus. Novel coronavirus globally, it offered or presented some strange situations as well. In some countries, some politicians have taken the advantage of novel coronavirus for legitimizing their political rule or extending their political power. Say, for example, Hungary, Viktor Orban. He declared this as a pandemic and also a very politically unstable situation so that he could rule the country for next 36 years. We also come across situations recently in UK. Mr. Dominic Cummings, the strategic advisor to the political strategic advisor to British Prime Minister Mr. Boris Johnson, got into controversy because as he visiting his relatives, he violated the lockdown rules. Here in India also, the novel coronavirus has presented some strange situations where the MPs and MLAs were asked to restrain from their travel, and some of the opposition parties in the country also raised concerns about the way the ruling governments at the state level are using the lockdown rules or the disaster management rules to restrict the movement of elected representatives. So here in this show, I am going to discuss the various aspects of this. To many, it's a political controversy. To me, it's an academic exercise to understand whether these rules and regulations could be used by the ruling party or the ruling government to restrain the movements of the opposition MLAs or MPs, and what are the different aspects to this whole debate on the use of lockdown framework in this present crisis situation. I'm joined by Dr. Harisankar, a senior fellow with the Center for Public Policy Research. Welcome, Dr. Hari. We are going to discuss the rules and specifications in the lockdown mechanisms where it constrains the movement of elected representatives. So, what are the rights and duties and responsibilities of MLAs, MAs in an emergency situation like COVID? What are the legal perspectives we could when we analyze the situation? Because in India also there were allegations or even some political controversy around some of the state governments are limiting the movement of elected representatives. So, what is the legal side of this argument?
All right. Firstly, thanks, Dhanu, to this. For arranging this conversation. Let me start with a disclaimer. I'm no expert on constitutional law, but I think for the purpose of our discussion, my little knowledge would be sufficient. So to answer your question, there are no legal rights and duties codified anywhere in the constitution or any other law as far as the MPs and MLAs rights are concerned. So I think we should reframe this question or issue in a different. So they have, of course, roles and responsibilities in general terms, but there are no legal rights and duties. I'll come to that in detail. So in a general situation, unlike an emergency situation, and even today we don't have technically an emergency declared. So in a normal situation, they have their primary responsibilities of lawmaking, their legislatures, whether it is an MP, member of parliament, or a member of legislative assembly. So they make laws and they participate in the voting system, and as we are aware that their vote counts, because depending on what kind of items they discuss and what what subjects, what bills are made laws. So depending on different items, some items may require a simple majority of the house, or some, in some special cases, special majority is required. So their fundamental role is of lawmaking. And secondly, they have a deliberative role, which means that they engage in a lot of debates. They are supposed to basically bring in the concerns of their public, their constituency, and the council of ministers, or the political executive, as we call, they're answerable to them. So that's why
They're
we have.
answerable to the voters as well as to the government.
They are, I mean, the questions are raised by, or the concerns are raised by the legislators, MLAs or MPs. So the ministers are answerable to them. So what I'm saying, because the political executive is not completely free. So whatever policy they take, whatever decisions they make, during the question answer session, they are answerable to the legislator. So that is their one of the fundamental roles, their deliberative role. So they are supposed to represent their constituency and bring the matters of public interest before the house. And thirdly, they also have certain developmental roles in their constituency. That's why we have all those local area development schemes, both for MLAs and MPs. So in a nutshell, these are the basic roles and responsibilities. So to answer to your question, again, there are no rights and duties specifically codified in any law in India.
So in the situations like this, suppose now we take the example of COVID. There are different criteria been applied by the government to declare certain areas as hotspots or containment zones. If suppose one of these containment zones falls into one of the constituencies where the MLA, the sitting MLA, or let's say MP, is restrained from traveling to that place, and also to hear the grievances of the voters, because voters are finally they are the infected people here. So what is a mechanism? Do you say are you saying there is no mechanism for where for in which the MPs or MLAs are not in a position to address these challenges and convey to the government? Because finally the government is also responsible, MLAs or MPs are also responsible for the welfare of the people.
True. I get the concern. Of course, this is a public health emergency. So all these concerns are very, important. But still, if you look at from the perspective of what you call as the rule of law, so there are two basic tenets of rule of law. One is everyone is equal before the law, or no one is above the law, and the law applies equally to everyone, which is equally applicable to you, me, and the lawmakers.
Right.
So when the government or the executive comes up with the rules or the norms, quarantine norms, or public health measures such as declaring a particular zone as a containment zone or a hotspot, all these rules, depending on what is the exact legal nature of that rule, everyone is supposed to obey or comply with that rule.
Sure.
Of course, there are certain sections or the certain individuals who may be part of the executive or part of the public health machinery, or for example, media persons, they may be clearly exempted under that rule itself, or
So
authorized to.
So my question is, media persons are exempted, but MLAs are not exempted.
Right. Yeah. I mean, according to the rules, I mean, as
okay,
the rule,
right.
as it is laid down, it is not exempted. If you ask me the logic, public health officials, I mean, you have a lot of. Again, my response to that is to your earlier question is, of course, there are other mechanisms wherein the MLAs or MPs can bring these problems or individual matters to the attention of the health ministry or the government in different other ways.
Okay. So do you think there requires a better clarity, because this is probably the first time country like India is facing such a pandemic in an unprecedented level, and also complete lockdown across the country. So, do you think, as a legal professional, do you think do we have to come up with? Do you have to look at these issues in details and probably have to improve, or probably we should bring some more clarity in terms of who constitute the government, who are the part of the government, who are part of the decision making, and the MLAs and MPs rights are confined to, I mean, as of now my understanding is their business is only the legislation, not outside the legislature. But there is one more issue with respect to the legislative bodies, because we are not, I mean, the legislatures are not convened because of the pandemic situation now.
Sure.
So there should also be a mechanism where these issues could be raised by the MPs and MLAs, and that could be probably addressed in a different manner. What do you say about it? I mean, what is your take on this thing?
So I'll start from your last point, because I think it is not difficult in 21st century. Provided all the, I mean, I'm not saying that we have world class infrastructure, but still we have mechanisms where in a particular individually concerned MLA or MP can bring this matter, or if it is of that importance, to the government. And generally, with the surveillance system that we have, I don't think any matter of that concern is goes unnoticed from the executive's eyes. I don't think that is a big concern now, and there are mechanisms wherein you can even have meetings with a group of MLAs, group of MPs, even if they belong to opposition parties. That is not a problem. So it's not about going back to your first question. It's not about the legal clarity. I mean, there is a legal clarity as far as the state, who constitutes government, who constitutes the executive, who constitutes the legislative, and everything is clearly laid out. Laid down in the Constitution. For example, Article 12 of the Constitution defines what is a state. Sure. And we know the union and the state legislators, government, all are part of the state. And in terms of the political science also, the mechanism, the machineries are very clearly laid down. But what is required is there is a requirement of bringing in certain legal certainty with respect to the rules, because we are now ruled by the whole pandemic situation is governed through two different laws. One is the National Disaster Management Act and the Epidemics Diseases Act. And on the basis of this, particularly the NDM, the National Disaster Management Act, the executive comes up with a lot of rules with respect to quarantine, lockdown, etc., etc. And so this was my first point also. There is a lack of certainty. What is legally binding? For example, there is a requirement of maintaining let's say 6 feet of distance as a measure of social distancing. But is this mandatory? How do you enforce this? These are difficult questions, but even in questions like, your questions, can you exempt an MLA if that MLA belong, or if that MLA or MP is a representative of that containment zone? So there can be more certain rules which are sort of easily enforceable. I mean, so there are certain rules which are in the nature of advisory guidances. I mean, you are advised to stay at home. You are advised to wear a mask when you go out. You are advised to keep a minimum social distancing. And there are certain rules which are mandatory. And if those rules are mandatory, that is equally applicable to the lawmakers unless they are exempted.
Okay, so some of the comparisons that I've heard during the last few days was comparing the situation with the house arrest of the politicians like Omar Abdullah or Mahbooba Mufti. I know that the situation is totally different. The political background is different. The legal framework is different. But for an argument's sake, probably you could also think about a situation where, unless otherwise we have clarity on this, provisions, this act could be used to such an extent where the voice of opposition MLAs and MPs could be, restricted, or they could be, sidelined. Do you think so?
I don't agree with I don't know. How do you? I mean, draw this, or whoever
No,
has
it's
drawn
not.
this
It's an
comparison.
argument. It's an
Right, right.
argument.
I get
I'm
the
not
point.
comparing.
In the case of Jammu and Kashmir, when that particular Article 370 was revoked, they were put under the house arrest under a Public Safety Act.
Mhm.
Here, I mean, drawing parallels with the National Disaster Management Act to sort of restricting the rights or restricting the voice of the opposition MLAs. I don't think that's a very far-fetched imagination.
Okay.
But yes, there is a question of it's a question of legal capacity. For example, there can be instances in different parts of India where legislators belonging to the governing party or the ruling party were exempted from. It's not
Traveling.
they're
Yeah, they
exempted.
could
Yeah,
travel. Yeah, they could
yeah,
travel.
right, right. Probably because they are part of the political executive, they may be part of the minister, I mean the ministry, or part of certain
No, there are
committees.
occasions also where when we say above 70 above 60 are the most vulnerable group to the COVID.
Right,
And on an average, I'd say many of the state cabinets, the average
ministers.
age is above 60.
Right.
And of course, they have to execute the decisions taken by the cabinet. They have to implement. They have to oversee the plans. Then
Right.
the argument comes, and if you could travel, then why are you asking me to not to travel? That's the
Yeah.
question.
Correct. Yeah, that's a question of public trust because you are kind of applying the same rule to a particular elite section of the ruling party, and to the others you have a different rule. That is not something very good for, I mean, in a democratic system, and it definitely destroys the public trust. But again, I'll go back to my previous point. It's a question of legal certainty. So
Mm.
when the government says that 60 people aged above 60 or 70, so it is a kind of advice,
Mm.
right? Now the counter argument would be the minister who is above 70, but he is in
Against
his
it.
capacity, in his
Okay.
ministerial capacity, not as a layman who is
Mhm.
above 60,
Mhm.
maybe may have to deliver his functions as a minister. So this
So
is
there is
I
a,
mean,
so my question here is there is a certainty in the functions of minister, but not for the MLAs.
yeah, there is. I mean, I'm not saying that there is a certainty. So as far as political executive is concerned, the ministers, they have, because it is framed by them, by the
Mm.
executive, because we are now ruled by decrees, executive
Mm.
decrees, and they also have the competence to execute those decrees. So
Mm.
as part of, so a normal MLA or an
Mm.
MP,
Mm.
especially if he or she belongs to the opposition parties, they don't have the privilege of an executive, political executive. So yeah, unless they are exempted, unless they are individually authorized to, sort of to work for the public or to do something in the containment zone, they have to strictly abide by the rules.
So the conclusion is we should try to get more clarity in terms of
Uh,
the legal
cla-
certainty.
right, legal certainty in terms of
Right.
the rules framed by the executive, and the second thing is that it is a question of legal capacity. It's
Mm.
not just about a legislator. If the legislator, because even when we talk about separation of powers, there is
Mm.
it is not that straightforward, because our executive is part of the legislature,
Right.
because the chief minister and the council of ministers are essentially legislators. So it is again, even if you are a minister,
Mm.
but if you are breaking those quarantine rules, like
Right.
what happened in the UK, for
Mm.
example,
Right.
Dominic Cummings, he is the chief advisor. I'm not sure whether he is a minister, but the question is, if he is traveling that far for the purpose of, I mean, taking a public, or as part of the public health measure, then it is, I mean, legally justified. But
Mm.
So that's a question of legal
Right.
capacity. But if he is traveling in his personal capacity, or so, even if you have a minister who is having an important portfolio, maybe a health minister, but if that health minister is going to attend a birthday party or a marriage ceremony, that's a
Mhm.
question of legal capacity.
Mhm.
So it doesn't mean that. So if being a member of the executive doesn't mean that you can go on and continue breaching the quarantine rules. But if it is required for the purpose of enforcing or taking certain health measures
Mhm.
in the context of the pandemic, that can be legally justified, which that privilege is not given to the ordinary legislators.
Thank you, Harry. Thank you, Harry, for your valuable insights, and thank you for joining me on this show. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Very.
Uh, so I'll be continuing with discussions related to COVID in the coming shows also. Please visit our website cppr.in, where we have a dedicated page for COVID-related articles and also for infographics. We analyze the data that we gather on a daily basis, and you see the trend and projections from across the country. So please share your feedback. Please give your comments, and if you like this show, please refer this show to your friends and relatives. And please follow our hashtag policy beyond politics. And I'll come back to you with another interesting topic next week. Thank you so much.